Chapter 21. Self-hatred is a sin. The next day was the beginning of challenging and rigorous training for the new group of warriors that had just joined the newfound family. It was as if the wedding hadn't happened, other than the fact that Jonathan and Joy were smiling at each other throughout the day. The hours, days, and weeks had passed, and before long 3 months. The men and women performed jhun, read the Torah, and learned the weaponry and fighting techniques of Wanyanyekevu and the other warriors. Each warrior named their group after animals for competition purposes, and trained their groups just as hard as Wanyanyekevu had taught them. Some, like Obey and Daniel, taught even harder. Daniel named his group the Dragons, Obey's group the Boars, Joam was the Tigers, Jonathan, now called Aldhib, the Wolves, Elisha, Black Mamba, Elijah, Apes, Grace, Praying Mantis, Joy, Scorpions, and Mercy were the Panthers. The friendly competitions lasted months, and then as a whole, they were taught by Wanyanyekevu for 3 months how to fight as a team instead of separately, learning the Iasai, the Assegai, and understanding the meaning of Umkumbi, Impi, and Awa. And, of course, finally, Point de Dieu. A total of 9 months had passed, and Sabaoth was pleased with his people's progress. They were 74 strong. Wanyanyekevu woke up early one Sunday morning around 1 a.m. and stood by the lake thinking about his family in Louisiana and all the things he had been through since he left, when he noticed Negligence approaching him. Negligence was heavy-hearted as he spoke to Wanyanyekevu. "I have learned so much from you spiritually, but my physical man is confused, and I feel much pain, because I don't know who I am." Wanyanyekevu smiled. "Have you ever wondered why I picked you to train by my side? You are a man of conviction, a humble man, selfless, and someone with those characteristics, can and will always be a good leader. Now I don't know if I can say anything to comfort you, but I can tell you this: self-esteem, or self-worth, can help that feeling disappear. You need to find out who you are as a person, and love yourself. If you love yourself, nothing else matters, and you will eventually find everything you need in life. Family and ancestry are an important part of life, and you didn't have one. You were born a slave, and lived as one all your life. I can only imagine your pain. Face that pain, deal with that reality, and move on, my friend. For many years, my ancestors were slaves just like you were, but that was back when this country was first formed as the United States." Wanyanyekevu took a seat on the ground, followed by Negligence as he continued. "Years after slavery, our people went through a phase of taught self-destruction, self-hatred, and low self-esteem, and it nearly destroyed an entire generation of people. They started bleaching their skins, refusing to marry their race, which was heartbreaking, but Sabaoth stepped in and cured the hearts of his people. To be perfectly honest, the people who this country tried to destroy were the same people who led this country into salvation, but that's another story." Negligence' size was intimidating, but his heart was as big as he was. Tears falling from his eyes, he looked at Wanyanyekevu. "I'm ashamed of my past and confused about who I am. I understand I have to forgive myself first, but it's hard." Wanyanyekevu said. Transatlantic slave trade, or the Mafa, meaning great disaster, in Swahili, the African Holocaust, and some even called it the Holocaust of enslavement. Negligence said. "Excuse me?" Wanyanyekevu continued. "They robbed many of our people of their ancestry." Pointing to himself and back to Negligence. "Our people?" with a blank look on his face. "Our people?" Wanyanyekevu said. "Look around us. We have many nationalities that surround us at this location, living in peace. We are united with one common enemy, the Abenians, who are not of this world. But centuries ago, all black people like us were brought to this country in the transatlantic slave trade, and those already here were taken as slaves. All this took place across the Atlantic Ocean for 400 years. African men, women, and children were initially snatched from Senegambia and the Windward Coast. Slave traders later moved their operations to West Central Africa near the Kingdom of the Congo and neighboring Angola. West Africans sold West Africans from the central and western parts of the continent to European slave traders. Then, the Europeans became familiar with the territory and started capturing and selling them, themselves, to the Americas. They took slaves to the Caribbean, South America, especially Brazil, then to North America because the South Atlantic economic system centered on producing crops and making goods and clothing to sell in Europe. This alone increased the numbers of African slaves needed. This was crucial to those Western European countries competing to create overseas empires. They say the Portuguese were the first to engage in the slave trade, but the Arabs then Portugal started, and others soon followed suit like the British, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch Empire, and even the United States. Centuries later, millions of enslaved Africans were exported by the Red Sea, through the Swahili ports of the Indian Ocean, along the trans-Saharan caravan route, and of course, the millions that were transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. Ships departed Europe for African markets with manufactured goods such as cloth, liquor, tobacco, beads, cowrie shells, metal goods, and guns, which were traded for purchased or, should I say, for kidnapped Africans, who were transported across the Atlantic as slaves. The slaves were then sold or traded for raw materials and transported back to Europe. Negligence was upset, saying, "Who could be so heartless?" Wanyan shook his head. Even the educational system of the past force-fed us lies for centuries until the invention of the Internet, which allowed our people to dig for the truth. But these heartless people were organized by companies or groups of investors rather than individuals, and shipowners considered the slaves as cargo, not even human beings. Our people were transported to the Americas as quickly and cheaply as possible, arriving in the Americas to be sold to labor in coffee, tobacco, cocoa, sugar, and cotton plantations, gold and silver mines, rice fields, construction industry, cutting timber for ships, in skilled labor, and as domestic servants. The first Africans imported to the English colonies were first classified as indentured servants or apprentices for life. They and their offspring were legally the property of their owners, and children born to slave mothers were slaves. As property, the people were considered labor units sold in markets with other goods and services. The business was so demanding that the Portuguese established these outposts along the African coast, where they purchased slaves from local African leaders. The old history books said that about 12 million to 20 million Africans were said to have been sold in the Americas, but the number purchased by the traders is said to be much higher. Of those numbers, millions were raped, murdered, and died before reaching their destination. Negligence stood there listening in awe, as Wanyan talked, unaware of the time. Wanyan considered himself an expert in history and enjoyed learning and teaching about it. He continued, "Centuries after slavery ended, many names were given to blacks. The most popular names were Negroes, African Americans, and other not-so illustrious names like Abid, an Arabic term that means black, that many Middle Eastern immigrants to the United States used. Ace of Spades, African, for those unemployed or so-called lazy blacks. Africoon, a combination of African and coon. Afro, referring to their hairstyle. Americoon, a combination of American and coon. Angus, which was a black breed of beef cattle. Ape. And even apple, which has to do with hanging from a tree. Because thousands upon thousands of our people were lynched, and most of them were business owners and women. Arf, a term for blacks because of their poor swimming abilities. Ashy, because when our skin gets dry, it looks ashy. And Jemima, baboon, banjo lips, and many more. I can go on and on. Many leaders died for the right to be equal in this country, but to no avail. Blacks have fought in every war the Americans had ever fought. Despite that, we were still treated in such a shameful way. Men, women, and children were raped, murdered, and died until the European descendants realized that violence wasn't the way, so they created psychological warfare, which was the icing on the cake. Jim Crow's lighter skin versus darker skin, the women against the men, and the children against the parents almost created genocide amongst our people. On top of that, the school-to-prison pipeline, whereby 70% of those locked up were blacks. The oppression led to negative behavior in that we started manipulating and taking advantage of each other. You had the false black preachers, coin pimps, in the pulpits, who would take advantage of lonely black women, causing many not to believe in Sabaoth. Women started dating every race but their own and firmly refused. Black boys and men began disrespecting their black sisters at an unheard of level, even by today's standards. Many turned to homosexuality, and even murdered one another. Self-hatred almost killed every black person in this country in those days. Self-hatred is like telling Sabaoth he didn't know what he was doing when he created you. Therefore, to me, self-hatred is a sin. Wanyanyekova noticed the sun rising. Look at the time. Wanyanyekova laughed. I've talked your ear off, but we need to rest. Neriglisser was not sleepy and wanted him to continue. Never heard of those words like, but I feel so much better. Just listening to you speak about our history, please, you must continue. Wanyanyekova said. They use Wakatilians and attain now, but I'm always happy to teach, and I'm still learning more about history myself. But maybe, later today, we can talk even more, after I get some rest. Wanyanyekova had slept until 3 p.m. As he walked out of the tent, Neriglisser and a few Wakatilians were waiting for him to come out to finish his story. One of the women standing there had already prepared a meal for him, and he smiled and bowed to the young lady. I'm just as eager to tell you what I know, as well, thank you. After a few bites, he passed Neriglisser half of his plate. Have some? Neriglisser shook his head. No, thanks, I've already eaten. Wanyanyekova offered his plate to a few more men, and they all rejected it, but thanked him. Wanyanyekova took a few more bites and asked, How far are you in the Torah? They all shouted different books. Daniel, Isaiah, Matthew, Proverbs, Wanyanyekova said. Good enough. Taking a drink and sitting on the ground, the men followed. Okay, we stopped at the transatlantic slave trade. They took our identity and culture away from us and fed us lies for centuries. I need to backtrack a bit. It all started right here in the Torah. Let's start after the flood. For instance, Noah and his wife, 3 sons, and their wives were the only people saved. The sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these 3 sons of Noah, the entire planet was repopulated. According to history, the ark rested on Mount Ararat, in the land of Armenia, which is located north of what used to be called Iran, east of Turkey, and south of Georgia. Pulling up a map on his tablet with difficulty. Excuse me, I'm still not that good with this, just now learning this technology, since I left home. Pulling up 3 maps of the Earth. He pointed to the first one. This is how the Earth looked at this time. During the age of Noah, it was one massive rock called the Pangaea. Armenia was located here. Now up to this point, the entire planet spoke one language. Most of the people dwelled in one location called the Valley of Shinar located here. Men began to build a tower up to heaven. An ancient Jewish historian, Flavius Josephus, said, God also commanded them to send colonies abroad to repopulate the earth. But the people did not obey God. They say Nimrod, the Ethiopian, held the people under his dictatorship. When they were building the tower. That was the same Tower of Babel, of course. God disapproved of its construction because it showed disbelief in his word to go out and replenish the earth. He confused men's language and scattered them to the 4 corners of the earth. Wanyanyekova took a few seconds to think and then said, It only makes sense that those who understood each other left with one another. The sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. As I mentioned before, so men were classified as Shemites, Hamites, and Japhites, and not Caucasoid, Mongoloid, or Negroid. The ancients, including the Greeks and Romans, identified people according to their national or tribal names. They used Visigoths, Vandals, Saxons, Ethiopians, Carthagins, Jews, Arabs, Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Moors, etc. Naming people by races happened later in Europe. Certain Germans and others conceived of themselves as belonging to a Wanyanyekova gestured with his fingers, a superior race. Men like Johann Blumenbach, J. A. Gobineau, and H. S. Chamberlain, who were the first to divide humanity based on skin color, wanted to advance the supremacy of the white race and its culture. Racism caused millions of deaths and thousands of wars. Race classification set up the color line, designed to create hatred, which was more like envy. Anyway, I'm getting kind of off the subject, which is a subject all by itself. Let's just say many people who look like us had to learn our history again because they spoon-fed us lies about who we were for centuries. Taking down the first map and pointing to the second and third maps, Waninyekova stated, "These two maps are really what I want you to pay attention to. This first map is what the planet looked like during the beginning of creation. The Pangaea began to break up. Some people have different times when this happened, but through tectonic plate movement, caused by mantle convection, and just as the Pangaea was formed through the activity from rift zones, it also generated this supercontinent to separate. I guess that was when the people separated, during the Tower of Babel, and it looked pretty much like this map here, and since the Abenians came now, it pretty much looks like an ice sandwich. By looking at this first map, you'll know where these places are located. Today, some don't exist anymore, and now most humans just live along the equator. Anyways, as I was saying, the parts of the earth inhabited by the children of Shem were parts of the territory of Assyria and Elam, or simply Persia east of the Tigris River, the eastern part of Syria, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. The second classification of humanity was the Hamites, who controlled the great centers of civilization in ancient times soon after the flood. This civilization included the continent of Africa, the land of Canaan or Israel, and parts of Arabia, Syria, Phoenicia, Turkey, Babylonia, southern Persia or Iran, East Pakistan, and India. And the third classification of humanity was the Japhites, from Japheth, the youngest son of Noah. The offspring of Japheth occupied what was known as the Isles of the Gentiles, the shore territories of the Mediterranean Sea in Europe and parts of Asia Minor, for they migrated northward over the entire continent of Europe and a prominent part of Asia. Japheth's descendants traveled west, north, and northeast of the mountain of Ararat and the Caucasus Mountains. Waninyekova looked up and noticed that he had attracted an enormous crowd attentively listening as he continued. Gomer was the ancestor of the first Cimmerians and the later Cimbri, including other offshoots of the Celtic family and the Gaels of Ireland, Scotland, and the Hebrides Islands. The second son of Japheth was Magog, the father of the Magagites. Flavius Josephus, remember that name? For he was a great Jewish historian, and he said that the Greeks called these people Scythians. The Scythians included all the wandering tribes who dwelt near the north of the Black and Caspian Seas. The ancients regarded them as tremendously lacking in intelligence and civilization. Japheth's third son, Madai, is the father of the Medes. They were located in the southern part of the Caspian Sea and later united with the Persians to form one race. From Javan, the fourth son of Japheth, came the Ionians and all the Greeks. Tubal, the fifth son of Japheth, is associated with Javan, Meshech, and Tubal, which are nations of the north. The last son of Japheth was Tiras, the father or ancestor of the Thracians. This land, Thrace, was north of Turkey, Asia Minor, and northeast of Greece. Japheth's grandson, Ashkenaz, formed the Germanic race. In Hebrew, the name Ashkenaz means German. The Germanic tribes were nomadic people. They were Lombards, Burgundians, Franks, Saxons, Angles, Jutes, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Suevis, and Vandals. These 10 Germanic barbarian tribes settled all over Western Europe. All these tribes were the descendants of Japheth. The Europeans did not have any great civilization immediately after the fall of Greece and Rome. During the Middle Ages, the black nations of Africa and Asia had the most remarkable political, economic, educational, and military influence in the world. At this time, Europe existed in a state of darkness for 1,000 years. The earliest civilizations began in North Africa and the Middle East among the black races. Waninyekova was interrupted by Elijah. We have people about 10 miles away approaching our location on foot, from the south heading this way. Waninyekova smiled at Neriglisser. We will continue this later, but let me say this, never believe everything that I say, look it up, and always read for yourselves. The truth is out there, and never trust the word of one man, research for yourself. Then he turned to Elijah. Well, this is the nearest place to find water, it only makes sense, But let's see if they are friendly or foes. By the way, as he slowly walked away and turned to Neriglisser, your name, Neriglisser, is a Babylonian name. There once was a prince named Neriglisser, also known as Nergal-Sharezer, who was a leading prince in the court long before he seized the throne. He entered Jerusalem with the armies of Nebuchadnezzar and held the post of Rab-Mag with the occupying armies. I don't know the meaning of Rab-Mag, but I believe it is some kind of high political office. Anyways, Nergal-Sharezer was one of the princes of the king of Babylon, because the Torah said, and he sat in the middle gate of Jerusalem, which served as the center of government for the Babylonians before they destroyed the city. Neriglisser or Nergal-Sharezer released the prophet Jeremiah from prison and entrusted him into the hands of Gedaliah. He married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar and, for that reason, considered himself a legitimate successor to his throne. Obey and his entire group, alongside Wanyenyekevu, got on their horses and slowly rode up to the strangers as they continued to walk toward them. An old man gestured to his followers to stop as he spoke to Wanyenyekevu. "Evening, my friend. My name is Raphael," pointing to the members of his company. "This is my wife, Letitia, my sons Jamie, Miguel, Fernando, and Alejandro, my daughters, Josefina and Sylvia, and my nephews Jose and Juan. We're..." Wanyenyekevu, already seeing the meeting, quickly shot Juan and Jose without a word. Wanyenyekevu then said to the old man, "Your enemies are now dead. Please tell me what they were planning to do to you and your family." The old man was still in a state of shock. How? How did you know?" Wanyenyekevu smiled. "Let's just say, I saw it ahead of time. Plus, your formation was all wrong. Who puts the elderly up front?" The old man replied. "They were going to sell us as slaves because of a debt owed by my son Jamie. We are from Chihuahua, Mexico, but they forced us to go to Reserva de la Biosfera Llanos, awaiting someone to get us, but they didn't make it, so they forced us to walk when they didn't show up. We have not eaten in 2 days and are very weak." Wanyenyekevu looked at Obey and shook his head. "My friend, take these people back to camp, feed them, and make them as comfortable as possible. The husband and wife can take my horse." One of the men got down off his horse. "No, one of them can take mine." 4 more men stepped down, allowing the rest of Raphael's family to take their horses. Obey rode off as Wanyenyekevu and the men walked back towards camp. Neriglisser and Joan were later seen approaching them with 5 more horses less than 6 miles away. "I'm not the only one with a big heart, I see," said Neriglisser. Smiling, Wanyenyekevu said, "No, you're not. And I just bet you wanted to bring us horses out of the goodness of your heart." Neriglisser laughed. "Yeah. Plus, you're a busy man, and no one is training today. So, I was talking to myself. I said, hey, self? You know what? You figured we could learn some more about our history if we take Wanyenyekevu some horses." Wanyenyekevu laughing. "Good answer." Getting on the horses, the small group headed toward camp, Wanyenyekevu trying to remember where he had left off. "Okay, well. Oh, we come to the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Ethiopians who were black people." Wanyenyekevu stopped for a moment as he looked at the other men. "I'm sorry, if you want to go ahead, it's all right." They shook their heads and listened attentively as well. Well, these men contributed much to the advancement of civilization. Because they studied astrology, they were capable of formulating many principles of astronomy. These black people were so intelligent that they could divide the years into months, weeks, hours, minutes, and seconds. In mathematics, they developed the decimal system. The most famous Babylonian king was Hammurabi. Even the Hebrews adopted his laws and then transmitted them to the Greeks, Romans, and other Europeans. The literature of the Babylonians is fascinating. Long ago, these black people wrote with sharp instruments on clay tablets. Thousands of these tablets have been found, which disclose a popular work known as the Enuma Elish, or the Creation Epic. The story of how the world began derived from the Babylonians. After the dispersal of humanity at the Tower of Babel, the Black Hamites migrated toward the east, south, southwest, and west. These Black Hamites settled in the land of Canaan, later to be called Israel by the Hebrews. The land of Canaan gets its name from the youngest son of Ham, who was Canaan. We may call them Africans because of their blood relationship to the other inhabitants of the African continent. 11 Canaanite tribes were living in the land of Canaan and surrounding it before the black Israelites possessed it. Arriving at the camp, Wanyanyekova looked at Neriglisser. Now, the next time we have time to talk, I want you to tell me something about our history and also tell me something that happens in history outside of the Torah. Giving Neriglisser his tablet. Take this. I'll get another one from Jonathan or Elisha. Let's say in 2 weeks or so, but right now, I need to do a few things, before I see about our friends that just arrived. 3 hours had passed since Wanyanyekova had seen Raphael and his family, and he figured they were well rested and should have eaten by now. Wanyanyekova knocked on the entrance and walked into the tent once greeted. Seeing Raphael and his family, all were asleep except Raphael and his son Jamie. But he could tell it wouldn't be long before they would sleep. Wanyanyekova whispered, I hope all is well with your family, and has everyone had plenty to eat? Raphael replied, All is well, and we thank you for your hospitality. Wanyanyekova smiled. No problem. I see you, and yours are tired and sleepy. Please take your time and make yourself at home. We will talk in the morning unless you need to report to me any such dangers that we need to be aware of. Raphael said, I don't know of any. As Wanyanyekova was walking out to bid them farewell and good night, Jamie said, Wait. Handing Wanyanyekova a piece of paper, Jamie said, You need to see this place. Because many people dressed like you are sent there by the hundreds, maybe even the thousands, every month on a spaceship. It usually comes in the middle of the night. But there was once when it arrived during daylight. It's a ship like no other. The ship is a metallic gray that would rotate from 0 to 180 degrees back to 0, then quickly rotate to 360 degrees and repeat this sequence. It has multiple holes where you can see through the ship, and it doesn't seem like it's capable of carrying so many. The key code to get past the large shutter doors hidden in the lakes is on that paper. Wanyanyekova looked down at the paper and read the numbers aloud. 020466 DDP. Jamie continued. There's an invisible walkway south of a red-painted boulder near the lake, northwest of the city of Ciudad Cuauhtémoc, Chihuahua, Mexico. It's heavy guarded by Abenians with about 3 or 4 uplink satellites on the far southeastern roof. Wanyanyekova was curious. My people? He said. Jamie said. Are you not Wakatilians? Wanyanyekova, with a peculiar look. Well, yes, I am. Only thing. Jamie said. I never heard them speak English. It's another tongue I'm not familiar with. Wanyanyekova put the paper in his pocket. You too, get some sleep. We will talk in the morning.